So I'll just introduce myself as
Okay.
Ian Saint. I'm with Ohio NPR PBS affiliate, WOUB. I'm actually, ironically, in Britain, so I guess we've switched bases.
How extraordinary.
Yeah. I'm in Glasgow currently with family.
Okay.
So I guess we're keeping eyes on our respective countries for each other.
But it's Ian, right? Ian.
Yeah, so
Thanks,
you've
Ian.
actually got 2 shows in Ohio on this world tour that you're currently
that's
on.
Right.
You'll be playing Cincinnati, the Taft Theater on April 28th, and also
Yeah.
Akron at the Goodyear Theater on May 1st.
Yes.
You'll be performing the legendary Genesis live record, Seconds Out and Fool, plus bonus tracks new and old. We'll definitely talk about Genesis Revisited, but I would like to start out with your newer material. We actually have a mutual friend in the form of Durga McBroom.
Right.
Yeah, she's a dear, dear friend of mine. I just stayed with her in Rome this past Halloween. We had a great time. She and her sister Lorelei, of course, sang for Pink Floyd, and they sang on your recent single, Wing Beats, which is a celebration of Africa. I actually just yesterday returned from Tanzania and Kenya, where I had done safari.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
so, yeah, I texted Durga this morning as I had watched the music video again, and it brought a new smile to my face to see that after having that done that experience. The McBroom sisters also sang on Underground Railroad on the previous record, which gave me goosebumps. You know, as an American, I'm really impressed by how authentically a British man really captured the essence of the region. And then, you know, on the following record, Wing Beats was such a beautiful tribute to Africa. So I guess my first question would be, is it fair to say that even after 50 plus years of touring the world, you continue to be inspired in your travels?
I think so, both geographically and historically. Obviously, Underground Railroad from the previous record was about the emancipation of the slaves, whereas geographically, with the more current record, it's, as you say, a celebration of all things ethnic American, if that's the right, Afro-American, that would be more the term. And I was thrilled to work with those 2 incredibly talented sisters who have worked with the Floyd, the Stones, all sorts of stuff, so that's great. It's challenging to come up with something that's authentic Americana when I'm a Brit. I'm in the wrong place. I'm the wrong color. All sorts of stuff. But writers have imagination, and when you've got a team like that, the band that I have, plus those extraordinary singers, it means we can mix and match and build bridges between times and cultures and places, of course.
Yeah, and it came out beautifully. So my kudos on that. Underground Railroad in particular, when I heard that intro, I was just like, wow, this is really gripping. You guys did a fantastic job with that.
I'm glad you liked it so much. Yeah, I had a great time doing it. I think I was influenced by the story of Harriet Tubman when we were in Wilmington many, many years ago. And the idea of the Underground Railroad was coming up, which became a book and then became a film. But of course, it's all based on the real life experiences of those who suffered to bring us to the point where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and speaking of such experiences and how they inform your work, I know this past month, you are on a world tour, and so recently you were performing in Germany and Poland.
Yes.
While, as we know, this war is unfolding pretty close by.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, what was that experience like?
Yeah.
Both in terms of what you observed outside of the show, and do you think that climate had an effect on the audience or even you as the performer?
Well, I think so. We were on the doorstep of the war there, and the Polish people, as well as being very welcoming to us, of course, have done, a fantastic job of welcoming in refugees. That's been extraordinary. So as Poland's kudos goes up, perhaps, and the Russians, unfortunately, goes down. We're at the point, it's very strange because, you know, Russia has been such an influence culturally and yet politically currently that is sliding back to the era of Ivan the Terrible and Might is Right and all the rest. But as you're talking about that, funnily enough, on the day when we were leaving, getting a flight to come over this side of the pond from the UK, a Ukrainian guy got in touch and said, "Will you play on my record? I'm living in Kyiv." You know, that those people are functioning under extremely difficult situations. So first of all, I was thinking, all my equipment is traveling. I don't have my normal stuff, but I literally thought, well, what we'll do is I'll record something on Joe, my wife's iPhone, and I'll just be playing along to what he's sending me, and I'm hearing that in the background on an iPad. So there has been a contribution of something. So I was literally playing along on a practice amp. No time to get the notes right or anything, but just the spirit of it in solidarity with people who are going through hell right now. So yeah, once again, you know, we're on to the stuff of you know, extraordinary things going on in the world today, and the correlation of music and its relation to another kind of emancipation. If there's a link between, you know, the kind of music that you were talking about, the stuff I was doing then, and what I'm doing now. So in the midst of all that, of course, I'm doing a live show, but it's important to stay connected with people in a wider sense, and I think that expands the frame of the kind of music that one's able to do, either now or eventually. It all has its effect.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the live album that you're revisiting with this tour, which is 1977, Seconds Out. At this point in Genesis history, Peter Gabriel had left as lead singer, and you know, someone my age, I guess, you know, my generation's first acquaintance with Phil Collins was the Tarzan movie, and you know, him singing on that. So it's kind of hard to fathom, you know, when he wasn't a lead singer. So my understanding is that when Peter had left, you had auditioned some others, and then eventually Phil was coaxed into becoming lead singer.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Certainly, yeah. Well, I remember years and years ago when I first saw Genesis, just before I joined them, and this would have been 1970, long time ago, 52 years ago, a mere 52 years ago. I saw them at a gig and I thought, well, that's an interesting double track effect they've got on Pete's voice there. I wonder what that is. I must ask him, is that some kind of ADT, automatic double track? And then I realized that he was being ghosted by Phil, who had a very similar voice. You know, the vocal range seemed to be very much the same. And then when I was doing my first solo record, I asked Phil not only to drum on it, but also to sing on it. He sang a track and sang it very well, track with Star of Sirius. Now, when Pete left the band in 1975, we had this choice. Who are we going to have as lead singer? And I remember the guys were saying, oh, singing drummers, it doesn't look great live, etc. And I was at Phil Collins' first wedding. You know, he'd been married 3 times, but when he was first getting married to his childhood sweetheart, Andy, I was meeting John Anderson of Yes for the first time at the wedding. And he said to me, why don't you make Phil the lead singer and get in another instrumentalist? Of course, we went right round the houses, and John was absolutely right. And I managed to convince the guys that, you know, Phil would be the right man for the job. Of course, the rest is history. Where you came in, you know, from backtracking from Tarzan and all the rest, it seems unthinkable that Phil was seen as merely the drummer when there was so much else that he had available within the armory.
Did you have to, I guess, encourage Phil himself? Was he having some doubts of his own that you talked him out of overcoming?
Well, you know, and at the time he considered himself to be, he had been a singer. He'd been on stage singing the part of the Artful Dodger in Lionel Bart's Oliver. So Phil's background was stage school and film and various things, but he considered at that time he wanted to be a drummer. He said being a drummer is a more respectable gig than being a singer. But there we are. Fate had something else in mind for him, and rest is history.
Yeah, what an extraordinary story. Now your live set does include the entire album, and that does include Supper's Ready, which is a pretty ambitious inclusion, because it's this massive magnum opus that it's 50th anniversary this year. The studio version is 23 minutes long. You know, I'm very struck by how you were only 22 years old at the time that you recorded Supper's Ready. So I'm very curious, what is it like revisiting that track 50 years later and reflecting on that experience and how it feels to present it to audiences where many of them were born years after?
Yeah, well, time and time again in polls of progressive music, that seems to come number one, ahead of many other tracks, many other bands that were things I loved, you know, from heroes of mine, but that track seems to be right on top. Of course, ironically, it was influenced by some of the stuff that I'd seen King Crimson do live, the idea of long form, but, you know, the musical continuum, linking tracks, segueing them live, things as disparate as Holst's Mars and Cliff Richard's The Young Ones, and sticking them all together. And I was talking to the band saying, we could do something long form that I think would be, you know, focus for the live show, provided we do it with all the bells and whistles. We have a light show, we have to have a mellotron, we have to have so many things going for it, the children's voices, effects, all the rest, and it all has to be, you know, sung in such a way that it's like, it's a musical journey, it's a kind of odyssey, but essentially it's a love song, a very long one, but, you know, I think it's the successor to MacArthur Park and the things that had influenced us when we were terribly young.
Yeah, well, and kind of on a similar note, I'm wondering, you know, in light of, gosh, so many mass societal events, you know, with the pandemic and that is still ongoing, but it's kind of a mass trauma event associated with that. You know, there's war going on in Europe. I'm wondering, have you noticed from the time, I guess, as you've resumed touring, do certain songs seem to resonate a bit differently with the audiences versus when you were performing them 2019 and previously?
Oh yeah, well, I think your relationship to songs changes because certain things sound sweeter with the passing of time. Even complicated songs like Supper's Ready and Firth the Fifth, these long form things where the boundaries between what's pop and what's rock and what's the written word and I like to use the expression films for the ear. In a pre-video era, telling a story meant that it had to be rooted in the grooves of the plastic itself when vinyl was king. That all changed in the MTV approved video oriented era. So you've got that split, that kind of schism between, you know, what is the purpose of music? Is it, you know, to give people audio adventures in the wake of Sergeant Pepper, or is it to do albums full of potential hit singles, which are not as satisfying as journeys? So I think certain bands, you know, that have a legacy and still have the respect, and I'm thinking of Pink Floyd and Zeppelin, where singles were entirely optional. And I think in the case of Floyd, they only had a couple of hit singles in the very, very, very early Syd Barrett days, and then became something else, you know, quintessentially albums orientated acts. And Genesis had that as part of their DNA in the early days. Everything was about live work. Radio hadn't caught up with Genesis because the songs were too long, etc. So we were kind of anti-radio. Now things are different. The band has crossed that divide. so many times, and the audience is divided. What's best? Is it the early era? Is it, is it the early classic stuff of the 5-man lineup with Peter Gabriel, Mike Rutherford, myself, Tony Banks, Phil Collins, or is it the 3-man team that follows? It depends, at what point you got on board the roundabout, really. At what point did you notice the circus? I think in all its incarnations, the band had something to offer in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're absolutely right too about how Pink Floyd was a very albums-oriented band, and they had Money, they had Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and I think like 6 or 7 years in between them. And likewise with Genesis, in the era of Genesis that you were in, I don't believe any songs hit the pop charts at that time, and yet that work is so enduring that 50 years later you're touring behind it, and I see that you're selling out shows left and right. Okay.
Well, that's been great, because I know there's the aspect of Genesis said that they did their last Domino tour. They say they're not going to do any more stuff. Obviously, there's the aspect of Phil and the things that are beyond his control, because it's the most popular story in rock at the moment. The idea of who's done so much, who has his challenges these days through no fault of his own. But beyond that, what we're doing with our interpretation of all things Genesis, let's put it this way, we've been touring on and off since the fall, since we were allowed to, post-pandemic, get back on the road. So we're in the middle of a world tour. We've done Scandinavia, the UK, some stuff in Europe, Eastern Europe, and this year we're doing the States. We will be doing Canada at the end of the year. That had to be rescheduled. We will be doing Australia, New Zealand, Japan. So life is living out of a suitcase. That has its challenges, but it's also wonderful to be able to bring the music to the people. Music's job, I think, is to at least re-energize, if not to heal people. And it's wonderful to be part of this, and to not just do the old stuff, but also some new things as well that people may be less familiar with, but goes down equally well, because some of that stuff has charted.
We're really looking forward to welcoming you back to Ohio, and we hope both shows go well, and continued success with the tour.
Thank you. And give my love to Scotland. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Take care, Steve.
Thank you, Ian.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.